Today we're going to talk a little bit about 360 chain roll and just some best practices. We continue to as we install more, get across more heads, and get across heads of different age. We just learn a little bit more of just best practices or things that we can do just as we understand really what we're looking at with 360 chain roll. So we're just going to start here with some of the more common questions that we get around 360 chain roll. And so one of the most common questions that we get is wear. How long will they last? And I'm going to share some information just today of exactly what you guys can look at as far as wear and how long they wear. I would tell you that the wear has been really, really good. Even some of the first year where we did not do quite as much laser cladding as we do today are still having significant life in them. So one thing we're going to talk a little bit about settings. Do these rolls need to run differently at different settings than maybe the rolls that I previously had on my corn head? Installation. We're going to talk a little bit about some best practices on installation and talk just a little bit about what we do prior to sending the rolls to you. One other common question we get is around residue knives. And can I use my existing residue knives? Can I not use my existing residue knives? Should I use my existing residue knives? So we'll talk a little bit about residue knives here towards the end of this 20 to 25 minutes. And then next is just models. Our current models, our future models. Will we have more models available? And so I'm going to hit on that one right now to make sure that I don't forget it. So currently, our casting and everything is around really three different rolls. One that fits a 40-90 series, like an 893 or a 643 or that series, where we have the roll pins and the bolts that hold them. And then we have availability around a 600, which we call old, which is the different spleen of the shaft. And then we have around the current model, which is a 600 new. We continue to look at potentially coming with different models, but we're not aggressively looking at other models right now, just due to what it takes to get those casts and those moldings figured out. So we're going to move here to the next one. So there's a lot of different options for growers to be able to have on a corn head. And you'll see from chopping, and the chopping corn head kind of in the center of the screen. Right above that is what we would call an intermeshing roll, which some of the industry is doing that. Upper right is opposed rolls, which is probably one of the most common in the industry, where we're just basically pinching and getting the stock down. We have confetti rolls, and then we have newest to the market is 360 chain roll. So what we've tried to do there is just bring together a lot of the different things that we liked with different rolls and try to bring that into one and really think about planability. Greg just put a video up here just recently of him looking at emergence and ear size based on the residue that was left the previous year on corn. And I would just encourage you guys to think about that and what that seed bed looks like. And so chain roll is really the beginning of processing that nutrients in that infrastructure of that stock, getting that down, minimizing it blowing around and being able to get the nutrients out of there as quickly as we possibly can. As you'll see in this picture here, same corn head, same day. Right side of the head had 360 chain roll on it. The left side of the head had opposed on it. So we get a lot of questions about, okay, you're doing a lot more, and we intend to do a lot more because we're really trying to do a lot of different things, potentially minimizing a residue pass, which many have said, you know what, this has really changed the way I've had to do as far as manpower of just another sizing pass. So in some situations, guys are seeing the value of that. When we start looking at our rolls, a lot of people ask about stress. Do we add more stress to the corn head because that we're doing more? And we'll talk a little bit about that more. 360 is a very efficient roll. It's not a pressing roll, it's a piercing roll. So instead of me trying to push on something, I'm trying to actually stab into something. And so many individuals, including 360, has looked at horsepower. We've looked at potentially push on the shafts out as we're bringing those stocks in. And every revolution, we have 8 flutes. And so we're cutting, we're piercing, cutting. Are we creating more displacement? And we really haven't, through everything that we've done, seen any type of significant difference. In fact, in most situations, it's really no difference in what we're doing to that corn head. I will tell you, corn heads have very different days. When we're talking 13-foot tall corn planted at 36,000, going down through those stock rolls and through that corn head versus the day where we're doing 5 or 6 foot corn planted at 32,000. So we've looked at that. We've done our due diligence. Our desire is to do more with the corn head, but our desire is not to create more stress on that corn head long term. This is just some pictures of the fall of 2016. You guys have seen the crimping, you've seen the cutting, you've seen what we're trying to do. Basically, earlier in a slide, you saw the chopping corn head where you saw those small pieces. You saw the confetti roll where you saw the small pieces. We're trying to just, with the back of the rind, just keep those small pieces together so that we can move them with the row cleaner so that the wind does not move them away, but we can still get that degradation going. But just being able to hold those things together to be able to move better and to be able to keep them basically in where we've left them in the field. So you guys have all seen this. This is a best practices card that we have really for all of our products, and we thank you for the feedback of you as dealers and also growers of just saying, hey, these cards have really helped. And so we plan to continue to do these as we move through new products as we come out. But as we kind of look at the arrows there, sometimes I think we kind of forget the things that we're trying to accomplish when we're installing these things. Nutrient availability, obviously residue is a big word. Anytime you put residue management, people tend to open that article. Increased ear count. Greg just did, like I said, that video on what he saw prior to harvest. One big thing I think that we forget about is the extra pass potentially. Not saying in every chance we're going to see the extra pass. We've heard when people are baling stocks, we dry out quicker and they don't need to chop the stocks prior to the baler. That's maybe one pass. Obviously, the bigger deal with many is the ability to not have to go in there with a sizing tool in the fall, vertical tillage or disc, to be able to break down those long stocks. So that, and some people will say is $15 to $16 an acre. When we talk about less horsepower, lots of times we get compared to a chopping corn head. So less horsepower on this would be when we start looking at, can I get away from a chopping corn head? Now, I would tell you from a sizing and degradation standpoint, we can definitely see that many growers are doing that. Some growers really like that clean shaved look of that field, and we don't do that. We leave it flared up. But as far as from a nutrient standpoint, a residue breakdown standpoint, we can get pretty much actually probably even to the point of we can actually degrade a little bit more because we're actually piercing more closely than even the chunks that are coming out from underneath the chopping corn head. And then just combine efficiency, just the ability to get things pulled down. Those stock rolls are a huge part of the corn head, and having stock rolls that do a good job of really getting a good tug on that plant is very important. So the right side here, we're going to be going through this today just a little bit as we walk through just on the best practices. So when we look at installation tips, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do to get the rolls ready for you to come out so that when you open a box, you for sure know what you're looking at from an installation standpoint. Obviously, you're going to be removing existing rolls. Sometimes they come off rather easily if the person before you was kind enough to anti-seize them. In other cases, it's quite a job to get those off. But once you get those off, and start to inspect the corn head. And that's really where we're going to start here today, just on installation tips. So most of the rolls that you're going to see today in these pictures are rolls that have been used. I think we are guilty at times of maybe just showing you what they look like new. Tried to take pictures of everything that had some wear on them so you could see them shined up a little bit. But one pretty common thing we have is just left to right. You'll see the row there that's standing up tall. We've seen growers at times pick well over 100 acres with rolls that were installed backwards. And those flutes obviously are designed to bring the crop in. Just a reminder, every time I do an installation, I have to lay them out. It's such a brain teaser. I've got my left roll with an L in my right hand as I shove them on, because these marks are designed from the cab seat. So just a reminder during the installation, just to take your time. All these markings on these rolls, which are on all of them today, are sitting from the combine seat. And so if you're standing in front of the head and you're shoving them on, you're actually going to have the L in your right hand and the R in your left hand. And just a reminder that it's from the combine seat is how the industry looks at these rolls, and looks really at the corn head. So the one part that we get quite a bit is actually probably not quite a bit, periodically, and this seems to be more around the 600 series head. The 4090 was a heavier head, much more rigid. As they went to the 600, took some of that weight away. So periodically we would see a row unit start to shift down. So if you put on a 360 chain roll and you have contact with the framing, which is rare but not uncommon, the first thing is maybe I should grind those teeth off. And that's not really where we want you to go first, because usually when we start looking at the dimensions of our roll, they're certainly not significantly bigger than the roll that you took off when it was new. That roll that you took off has been worn down, therefore the clearance issue is not a problem. So it's not really as much about 360 chain roll as much as it over the lifetime of the previous roll, as it wore down, the head sagged a little bit. And so we have a shim kit that we sell. And so underneath the row unit, in that top left picture, you'll kind of see where the roll is, back tucked in there by that number 1. You can loosen those 4 bolts and have someone pick up on the row unit, and you can shove a shim back behind there, which is going to take a little bit. It's going to help lift that row unit back to where it was before, and it's going to give you that clearance so that you don't have that rub. And so this is what you're going to see before on the left, and this is what you're going to see after you've shimmed it. Now we have 2 different sizes of shims. It does not take much at all. You can put a very thin shim in there and you can make a 1/2 inch difference really on the top of the row unit. So we do have a shim kit with this. Just to bring this to your attention, I probably only ran into this maybe 5 or 6 times on all the heads that I've been around. But when you do run into it, you need to know that there is a solution for that. And again, that's typically on the 600 series heads. And so the next best practice as far as installation. So what you guys have seen this year is when you open a box, you're going to see those on the bottoms, you're going to see those white marks. And this is probably more important or more, there's just more things to the 600 series head. The 600 series head has a longer shaft. We put the bolt on the end, we squeeze it back on the spline. And so we sit there and we put these rolls on there at the yield center, and we run them at full RPM, similar to what a grower would run in his field while he's harvesting. And we just look for clearance issues and anything that goes with that. We want to make sure that they're going to run at full RPM. And then we turn them, and then we put a mark. And we suggest that part of a best practice is to, as you line your shafts up, to shove them back on with these marks so that you know how they were tested. Okay, so in most situations, you're going to put those on, you're going to put the nuts on, you're going to take your ratchet, you can start turning that row unit by hand with the ratchet in the front. And if you hear any type of of rubbing or tinging or anything like that, there's a possibility that even though that row unit is within specs, there may be a small dog leg in one of those shafts. And I would tell you, as you put more on, you'll start to be able to look at the shafts and understand how you want to align them to put them on. Because for whatever reason, it seems like the left, if one of them is slightly dog-legged, it's usually from the combine seat, it would be the left one. From standing in front of it, it would be the right one. And so if there is a small dog leg in there and you're getting a little bit of hitting, simply pull the rolls back off and then turn them 180. You'll see that in the second picture, and then shove them back on over the spleen so you get on the other side of that dog leg. And that typically 90% of the time is going to take away that tinging that you're feeling when you're moving it with the ratchet. So that is just one thing. So when you see those white marks, just understand why they're on there, and that would be the best starting spot for it. But if you do have some tinging or something like that, now a lot of people say to me, so I took my ratchet, I turned it, I didn't have anything, I went that, and then I started my corn head up, and I just hear a little bit of pinging. And so as these things go through the laser cladding process and different things like that, there's some situations where we can almost get a little bit of slag on some of those cutting fluids. That's why I'm showing you pictures of them shined up. And so if you can turn them by hand, typically the green light on, if we do have a little bit of a tinging as we open that head up, we go to the field, we shine them up, we get the head under load, everything shines up, and all of that goes away. So just some thoughts during installation. Just want you guys to have peace of mind of how we're doing it, how we're looking at it. Obviously, tolerances are tight on these because they need to be. That's exactly what we're a very efficient piercing roll, and we want our stuff to be close together so that we can do the things that we need to be able to do. So this is a 4090 series. This is actually a very popular head that we're on quite a bit as well. Very different type of shaft, shorter shaft, much stubbier shaft, much thicker shaft. We tend to have less tinging. We tend to have less frame interference with these. It's just a row unit that is more compact, more girthy, so to speak, when it comes to that. So just wanted to share a picture of the 4092 as you guys certainly work with those as well. So the one question that we've got is how does the stock come into the 360 chain roll? And so you'll see that the flutes together, and then you'll see right in the circle where the arrow is, that is basically the feed chamber. So we basically have our augers in the front. We move that into, you'll see those cutting flutes are slightly offset. And then as we come around, you can imagine that thing running at 600 RPMs. We feed that stock into the chamber. And that's exactly what it looks like. You know, again, sometimes we're processing up to 30 stocks in here, you know, per second, as we're harvesting at a, you know, a 5 mile an hour speed at 36,000. That head is just screaming along. So that's really the opening chamber where it all starts. And so the one thing that we wanted to look at here with this slide is how does this roll start? And when you're doing the installation processes, sometimes we do the installation so fast that we kind of don't observe really what that is. So we are a processing roll. And so once we get into that chamber, we're not going to see like many rolls where we're wearing out the first 4 inches. Most rolls that I go on that have ran a full year, you're not going to duck under that head and say, boy, I can tell it's really wearing the front out. We're really screaming that residue through that roll all the way back as we're starting to tug that thing down through and basically bear hug that thing all the way through. So one thing that makes a difference is just ground speed to head speed. Well, you'll hear us talk a lot about it with Yield Saver, just being able to walk that thing along the process up to the auger of the corn head. And so this chart is on the best practices sheet. Just encourage you guys to use that. The one thing with our rolls is you'll see every roll has 2 cutting flutes. It's got 3 crimpers, and it's got 3, which I would call to be the backstop. And so there's a lot of confusion as far as what these rolls look like. So you're going to look at them and you're going to see something that looks more like an arrow end, and then you're going to see something that looks more flat and more rigid and a little bit more rough. And those two work in unison together. And so you'll see here where there's a bigger gap where I've got the arrow, and then you'll see the circle, which are 2 tighter flutes together, a cutting flute, and then also a backstop flute. And those 2 will fit in together. So one very important thing with 360 chain roll is that we clean out. If I were to give somebody a shot, or if I wanted to penetrate into somebody's arm an inch to give them a shot, I can't have buildup on my needle and only get in 3/4 of the way. So what we've done with 360 chain roll is basically the reason that there's a wide part and a narrow part is we switch direction every half roll. That helps keep that, so to speak, needle clean, so we can continue to get in and do that crimping and that piercing to the same level through many different conditions. So that's just one thing you're going to see when you install. You're going to put those 2 skinnies inside that wide. That tells you pretty much that you're timed, and then you're going to be able to insert that on the roll. So let's talk a little bit about wear here. So now you've got them installed. You've got it figured out what you're going to run for ground speed. You go to the field, you fire it up, you put it under a load, you shine everything up. So this roll here is ran over a period of time, and I wanted to show this because it's much easier to see this once you've ran a roll and you've shined them up. Not just looks a little bit different than when you just take it out of the box. So what you're seeing under that yellow, or on top of that yellow line, is the laser cladding. So we're coming down there once, we're coming back, we're coming down there twice. So very different than a lot of rolls on the market that basically start degrading the first day, and they're just going to continue to lose material at a pretty high or at a level over a period of time. When you start looking at laser cladding, which is very unique to our rolls, is our goal is to just stay at those very tight tolerances for a very long period of time. So you'll see after you run a roll for a year, you're going to look underneath there and you're going to see that line of laser cladding. And then you're going to come back and you're going to look at it again, you're going to see that line of laser cladding. We really haven't seen rolls, once we've been able to laser clad twice, really get through that laser cladding. Now it will at some point, but when people say, well, what's it going to look like in comparison to other rolls that I purchased, I would say that wear has been excellent on these rolls. Now I will tell you, if you look just to the left at the end of that yellow mark, you're going to see the top of that one has a little bit of a nick on it. So when you do hit rocks, or you get a rock in there, it's not uncommon to have a slight chip, as you would with any other rolls, but certainly that one chip's not going to change the functionality of that roll as we do that. So that's a laser cladding process. That's the wear process. We continue to get more and more acres on these rolls, and we just continue to be more impressed with just the way they're hanging in and doing the things that we want them to do from a wear standpoint. So one question that we get a lot is we'll get called out and people will say, well, what about my rolls? I think that it looks like part of my rolls are breaking off. And so what you'll see here in the red box is that is how they work together. So actually the top part in the box, which is a little more jagged, it's not as defining. That's actually the part of the roll that goes through the rind and through the pith and then stops. A lot of people think that the bigger, almost tooth-looking roll on the bottom of that box is the one that goes through and does the work, so to speak, of the piercing and through the rind and through the pith. That's not actually the case. It's that more jagged edge, and the two work in unison. So when you pick up a roll, you're going to have 2 cutting flutes. You're going to have 2 that look like the top, or excuse me, 3 that look like the top. You're going to have 3 that look like the bottom, and that's going to complete your roll. And both of them are laser cladded. You'll see below the box here, you can kind of see the other side of the tooth. Laser cladding on those as well, just to make sure that we protect that roll and be able to get the wear that we want to out of that. Here's just a more close-up picture of it. They're going to the part of the roll that does the piercing is going to look more jaded like that. That's perfectly normal. That's through the machining process. That's through the cladding process that we get incredibly sharp as we are ready to pierce that stock. So one other question that we get a lot is residue knives. And should we be running your residue knives, or can we run standard residue knives? And the question is you can do either. So the one thing that we've done with our residue knives, and it seems like more people are coming to our residue knives, is we have focused a little bit more on the funneling effect. So if you look at the black residue knives on the left, those are the ones that we're coming with, or that we came with, and we put more infrastructure on the front as a funnel into the chamber of the stock roll. And you'll see on the left where it's about a quarter to a half an inch difference as far as the feeding effect of that. And so it really hasn't made a lot of difference. Some people will prefer our residue knives when it comes to corn that has lost stock integrity, where we were basically pushing against something that really has no infrastructure. Any bit of help getting in is important. So as you're setting your residue knives and doing things like that, now there are most series, 4090 series, we strongly recommend our residue knives. In many cases, the other ones won't work just because of the design of the roll. 600 series, some we do, some we don't. But just keep in mind, as you're looking at residue knives do play an important part of getting the corn into the chamber. As far as setting the residue knives away from the rolls, a lot of places, a lot of OEM, quarter of an inch. We're fine with a quarter to 3/8 of an inch. We've got two cutters, so we don't see a lot of wrapping. If you do get in a situation where you have a lot of foxtail or a year of a wet field where we just couldn't get canopy, you may want to bring them in slightly. But typically, we've not needed to have them any closer than a quarter, 3/8 of an inch. The main purpose those residue knives are doing is just funneling into the chamber. So let's talk about best practices in the morning. So it's wet in the morning. You could have a hybrid that went down, that dried down very funny, became very ropey. And what are some things that we can do to just help process these things better than we could maybe with just the settings that we were running at in a field prior to that it was doing a really good job? So one thing, when it's wet in the morning, we do recommend a little bit more head speed. Just the opportunity to just get a little bit ahead, a little bit ahead of those stocks, just to help bring them through. Sometimes just raising your corn head just a couple inches up off the ground allows for more of an injection point underneath that. We've also seen just a slight change in pitch of the corn head, and we're going to talk about that here in just a second. Just the ability to just slightly change the corn head pitch. Still within specs, but just a little bit of a pitch can really change the way that we flare just from the way those stock rolls lay in that. So when we start looking at pitch, corn heads, really, as you read almost anything about corn heads, they're going to say somewhere between 22 and 24 degrees. And so we've seen this true. You'll see the picture down on the bottom just of the flared up stocks and just the residue that have been propelled out of a corn head that had 360 chain roll on it. Just understand what your corn head angle is. Once in a while, we'll get combines that are newer combines with an older head, and that head is really pitched strong. And those stock rolls are sitting at a significant angle. And that's not really the way the stock rolls were designed to run. They're designed to run within this 22 to 24 degree angle. That way the stock can come up as the momentum of the combine moves forward, and we can basically process that up through the stock. So that's really what I wanted to hit on today. How long will they last? I would tell you that when it comes to 360 chain roll, that laser cladding has just been industry leading, and the wear that we've seen on those, I just saw a set of rolls yesterday that had 234 acres on them, which we certainly wouldn't expect them to be by no means wore out at that point, but they almost look like they were new out of the box, just shined out. So that laser cladding really does a great job of just protecting that casting and be able to make sure we stay at that high level. As far as settings, I think the biggest thing there is head to ground speed. You know, keep that head going basically at the rate that the stalks are coming in. You get into situations where things are a little bit more tough or wet, you may want to give it just a little bit more. Installation, we do run on tight tolerances. Just remember, if we're hitting a little bit of tinging, that 180 turn can really make quite a difference. And models, really we're going to be with what we have today for the near future, with the idea of potentially others down the road. Just don't know exactly what that would look like. So I want to thank everybody this morning for being on this webinar, just taking anything that you can just to make this technology do exactly what we want it to do. It's a great tool that does a lot of things to that corn head. So with that, you guys have a great day, a great fall. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us. Thank you.